What's going on, gamers? So in this video, it's going to be Steam Deck versus Switch 2 Cyberpunk 2077, fully benchmarked, docked, and handheld by Digital Foundry. They go full analysis, so everything is out right here now. We've seen the other videos, but I think everybody's been waiting on this. So let's get right to it. No wasting time, because this is a long one, and let's get it all done. Let's see the full truth.
We've seen this sequence 100 times before, right? The classic Cyberpunk 2077 benchmark scene from the PC version of the game, only we've got it running on Nintendo Switch 2. It's part of a series of internal benchmark scenes buried deep inside the game, and once they're running on PC, it's possible to use Cyberpunk's cross-platform save system to port them over to any console version.
Oh, that's
Even
cool.
got them running on the PS4 and the PS4 Professional. But we're going to be using these sequences to do something different, to produce our first Switch 2 versus Steam Deck comparison. It's one of our most eagerly anticipated videos, according to backers of the DF supporter program, but this comparison comes with a
I already see everything right here. I mean, it's the clear winner.
gigantic array of caveats to consider. Steam Deck runs the PC version of the game through the Proton compatibility layer.
Okay.
The Switch 2 port is built for Switch 2 using a direct-to-the-metal graphics API.
Yes.
Secondly, the Switch 2 version has an array of custom modifications, meaning that while the games may look basically the same to the untrained eye, they most certainly are not. Thirdly, well, Switch 2 has a 1080p screen, while the deck is at 800p. 720p if you stick to a 16:9 aspect ratio. And finally, the Nintendo machine has a custom form of DLSS upscaling, which, as we shall discover, gives it a huge advantage over Steam Deck. For its part, the Steam Deck OLED, the model tested here, may...
That's what I've been telling people. When you combine the DLSS custom technology with the up-to-date NVIDIA GPU and the NVIDIA CPU RAM all combined together, they all function very well together. It's like everything just being NVIDIA. And it's not that bad. I wouldn't say it's impressive technology if you look at it from a console standpoint, but as a hybrid tablet device, yeah, it's pretty solid.
They have a lower display resolution, but its HDR implementation blows Switch 2 out of the water. And it's got a larger battery, 50 watt hours compared to the 19.75 watt hours in the new Nintendo machine. But let's just say it's going to need that extra battery capacity. Steam Deck efficiency is nowhere near as good as Switch 2. The contest is not even close, as you'll see.
Yeah, look at Nintendo's watt aspect, 8.9 watts. It's absolutely insane. Nobody in the industry can do this. But they've been doing this for a while, but that efficiency is insane.
Finally, we need to consider the actual point of these devices.
Yeah.
Steam Deck makes little sense as a quote-unquote docked device connected to a display. Switch 2 is a hybrid console built from the ground up to support both handheld and TV gaming.
Correct.
We'll find lots of commonalities in the video ahead then. Some clear points of differentiation in game performance and especially power efficiency, but a matched like-for-like comparison this most certainly won't be. Before we crack on with the head-to-head, well, to help our understanding of the Cyberpunk port and any potential comparisons with Steam Deck, and by extension the PC version, we need to compare the two directly and get some kind of ballpark settings lock. Not easy when the game has custom adjustments made for the Nintendo console.
Yeah.
To try to create a level playing field of sorts in ascertaining settings equivalence, we captured PC at 1080p on DLSS quality mode, unless otherwise stated. I'll try to keep this brief, but I do want to show we've done the legwork here, or rather our valuable contributor Mohammed Rayan has. So this
is important because he's telling you everything they did. They leveled the settings. This is as equal as possible. It's important to know this.
Kick off. Starting with crowd density, there's clearly a thinning of the crowds as we move from left to right. By concentrating a little more on the far left NPCs, we'd say that medium quality is the closest approximate match to the PC version in both docked and handheld play. Next up, an easy one, contact shadows, where the Switch version in both modes seems to have them enabled, this one being a simple on-off toggle. Volumetric fog resolution next. This one seems to be closest to PC's medium on both docked and handheld play, as is the case for the volumetric cloud setting as well.
Okay.
Ambient occlusion though, here's where we start to see some divergence, as the docked quality mode seems to look closest to PC's high, while handheld performance mode presents more like the low preset. There are also differences in mirror quality, as you can see here. Let's look at docked mode first, where Switch 2 gives a good showing. It's most similar to the high setting on the PC version. Looking at the handheld equivalent, we've tried to match the lower resolution on PC, which now seems to suggest that Switch 2 is closest to the medium settings. Beyond that, things get a little more complicated because it's clear there's a lot of custom work on the Switch 2 version of Cyberpunk 2077 when it concerns aspects such as shadow quality, screen space reflections, and definitely level of detail. All of these components have no definitive match with PC or other consoles. Screen space reflections, for example. Check out this example. Scaling from ultra down to low, Switch 2 specifically presents most similarly to the low preset on PC, but even then there are differences. Meanwhile, in this scene, the ground looks most similar to the PC's high preset, but at the same time, the door is taking on additional reflections that are not found on the PC version at all, which is certainly interesting. Evidence perhaps of extra SSR ray marches. Low quality is the broadest general match for our approximate PC settings, but clearly this is not a one-to-one match. Moving on to shadows, Cyberpunk 2077 has a range of settings that we tried to match, but only with limited success. Local shadow mesh quality for starters. Well, this does seem to present in a way that looks like the PC's low quality preset. Cascaded shadow resolution. Well, based on this comparison, medium is a good fit for the docked quality mode, while low is most similar to the handheld performance mode.
Okay.
Distant shadow resolution, based on this Vista shot, Switch 2 in both docked and handheld modes is up there with PC's high. Beyond that, things get a little trickier. Cascade shadow range. We've opted for
Keep in mind, they did this in 2 months, by the way, on the Switch. They still have a lot more optimizations to go.
medium as the closest PC equivalent, but the truth is there are changes. This shot suggests that Switch slots between medium and low, and the same thing here in what looks like definitive evidence. But then we get an example like this, where the Switch version draws in a self-shadow later than PC's low setting. However, in this final shot, Switch 2 is equivalent to PC's high. It's pretty tricky then, so we've gone straight down the middle with our approximate choice, and medium it is.
Dynamic
Geometry
DLSS.
detail and level of detail is also custom, very much so. So looking at this example, where it's unlikely that the game is under too much stress, geometry on Switch 2 handheld and docked modes can be significantly simplified up against PC's low setting.
Okay, so now guys, we'll fast forward a little bit. We get the idea here, right? So now we're going to do the official benchmark.
A very quick look at the actual official benchmark test from the PC version. On Switch 2, it is a locked 30 FPS, that lock meaning that leftover GPU power can go towards increasing resolution for a cleaner image, up to 1080p. We're getting 95% of Switch 2 performance on deck with FSR3, dropping to just 89% using XeSS. Now, since we're dropping frames throughout on Steam Deck, chances are we're always upscaling to 1080p from lower bounds 720p. The gap widens if we compare a similarly set up 40 FPS performance mode, where the DRS window expands to 540p to 1080p. Switch 2 hits the target, but deck with FSR3 has 91% of deck performance, dropping to 84% with XeSS. In short, demanding more in frame rate terms sees the Switch 2 advantage open up even further. Despite trying to match settings as best we could, the early part of the Kabuki CD Projekt Red run here suggests a missing shadow cascade on Switch 2, but more obvious is that the performance from Switch 2 is much more consistent in hitting 30 frames per second. There's so much headroom here that not only is Switch 2 running more smoothly, but you are getting better image quality, not just from DLSS, but also from a wider dynamic resolution range. Switch 2 renders at anything from 720p to 1008p in this sequence based on our pixel counts, while Steam Deck with both upscalers is losing so many frames that the DRS window is just 720p to 765p here in this area where we do actually hit 30 frames per second. So a much higher resolution, a 29.5 FPS average, capped at 30 FPS, remember? That's on the Switch 2, with 27.4 FPS average from FSR3, dropping to 26.7 FPS from XeSS. In 40 FPS performance mode, Switch 2 finds its limits in any area with a decent level of geometry. Lowest frame rates are actually marginally worse than the quality mode here, and the opening of the sequence sees Deck take the battle to Switch 2 in what may be a more CPU-limited area, bearing in mind how XeSS and FSR3 offer similar results. However, the center part of the sequence sees the Nintendo console hug the 40 FPS line in a way that the Steam Deck does not. Pixel counts in this sequence range from 540p to 756p on Steam Deck, where corresponding shots on Switch 2 give us 630p to 900p. Now, Tom Morgan, credit to him here for doing the pixel counts. He counted 900p at this area on Switch 2 up against 540p on matching FSR3 Deck content.
Yeah, like when you look at this, guys, even like how it's maintaining a much better frames per second, it just, look at this image quality difference. It just looks so much better over here. Like, so they're just running settings a lot higher too. And all the stuff he was telling you about previously earlier in the video with DLSS on and still keeping the frames locked. Like, it's not a competition. It's literally lapping around it.
And that's in an area where we're dropping frames. Kind of suggests that the DRS system only drops when GPU limited, not CPU limited, as it should be. Some games don't, believe it or not. A quick look at this racing combat benchmark sequence from CDPR's internal tests, taken from the Beast in Me City Centre side mission. You'll note that the gap between FSR3 and XeSS is smaller than usual, and you'll also note that the gap between Switch 2 and both Deck iterations varies considerably according to content. Switch 2 remains faster and better hugging the 30 FPS line, but drops consistently when more enemy cars in play. In the 40 FPS performance mode, well, this is interesting.
This is why you gotta watch Digital Foundry. They're showing you all people making all those fake videos, making it run at like 7 frames. Like, that's why you don't listen to all those fake videos. You got to get to the professional stuff. Then you're going to just decide for yourself based off of what you see. And you see the comparisons I was showing you were actually true. I don't follow anyone that's posting fake stuff. We don't do that.
In lighter areas, Switch 2 continues to have an advantage, but long stretches of play in more detailed areas see all three iterations here play out with similar frame rates. Perhaps we are looking at similar CPU-based limitations here.
Yeah.
Switch 2 does seem to run at higher resolution in these areas, though. One final note, power efficiency. Measured from the wall, Switch 2 pulls 18 to 90 watts of power. Factoring in efficiency losses from the power supply, the machine, the Switch 2, likely drawing 16 to 17 watts of power. Now, this is actually lower than measured in our Switch 2 review, but more interesting is that Steam Deck OLED is running pretty consistently at 24 to 25 watts here according to its performance meter, and it's about 29 to 31 watts from the wall, a higher figure again likely via efficiency losses from the power supply. We aren't comparing like for like here. We've got to be clear about that. We're comparing what we've decided are the closest quality settings we could muster. But you've really got to take your hat off to Nintendo and Nvidia here. We have resolution and performance improvements over Steam Deck using 2/3 of the power. And at the same time, it's generally believed that the 8 or 10 nanometer Samsung process used by the Switch 2's T39 chip is not as performant as the 6 nanometer process used by the Steam Deck OLED. Remarkable stuff to see that gulf. All of which brings us on to handheld performance testing.
Yeah, when you think about that power draw, that's insane for preservation of battery life and just in general. This right here is like, it's crazy.
Arguably more relevant, bearing in mind that Steam Deck has few pretensions in offering any kind of home console experience attached to a TV. And this in turn presents a challenge, right? It's easy to capture the Steam Deck's output at either 60 or 120 Hz, as I've just demonstrated. However, Switch 2 has no video output in handheld mode. So how do you test performance? Carey from the Forks did things the super hard way by manually counting frames from a high-speed camera feed, so maximum respect for that. My approach? Different. I stuck to the 30 FPS quality handheld mode and used the Switch 2's internal capture system. This gives us a 1080p capture, but only at 30 frames per second, so half temporal resolution. However, the capped frame rate of the game matches the frame rate of the capture. Think of this as a temporary placeholder solution for measuring performance. It's not as precise as I'd like, but measuring this will highlight performance drops and a decent level of accuracy. Steam Deck, well, put it through the same frame rate decimation and we have the same temporal resolution sampling. Beyond that, what we need to remember from these comparisons is that once again, head-to-heads, exact head-to-heads aren't possible. Settings can't be matched, only approximated. We don't have DLSS on deck, nor can we set an 810p output resolution to match what Switch 2 is doing in quality mode. Best we can do is to use FSR3 with a 900p output resolution and a 50 to 90% dynamic resolution range to give us the same 450p to 810p DRS window.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
Kicking off with CDPR's streaming run in the Kabuki area of Night City, we kick off with like-for-like results with just a small level of instability on the Switch 2 side. The climax of this run sees further instability from the target frame rate, but interestingly, deck is more stable unless collision detection registers a hit. Then the deck seems to momentarily lose its 30 FPS lock. Suggests a CPU advantage for the Steam Deck. But the elephant in the room here is power draw. Steam Deck OLED is still maxing out at around 24.5 watts on average, based on its own internal power meters.
That's triple.
But Switch 2 is delivering remarkably similar results, just a little less stable. And it draws around 8.9 watts on average, based on overall battery life. And it has DLSS, of course, so image quality is cleaner. Like-for-like pixel counts, well, that's tricky owing to the compromised nature of Nintendo's internal capture system. Even so, I'd argue in this as close to like-for-like scenario as we can get, for Switch 2 to be doing what it's doing using just 36% of the power used by the Steam Deck, that's astonishing.
They're literally limiting a lot of power. This machine could easily be more powerful in handheld mode and docked. They could even free up the game chat resource uses for people who don't want to use that and give them an extra core and give them more RAM, a little bit more GPU power. They can do it. I've seen the limits too that they put back. They're just doing that for super efficiency for handheld mode. But for people that are in docked, we should be able to choose a setting that can turn off that and use that, and developers too. I think they said that they were giving them that just because. I just think that would be better.
Moving on to the Beast in Me City Center test. This is a much more demanding test with far more drops under 30 frames per second. Okay. Although we can match up the runs here thanks to the CDPR benchmarks, what actually happens within them is dynamic. The more interactions with other racers, the higher the likelihood of a drop beneath 30 FPS. Switch 2 caps at 30 FPS of course, but it can drop to as low as 23 FPS, while deck is undoubtedly smoother with fewer frame rate drops and only dipping into the late 20s. Now Switch 2 of course still has a huge efficiency advantage, plus the image quality benefits of superior upscaling via DLSS. So let's address the next elephant.
So basically what he's telling you, like, Steam Deck obviously has better CPU for handheld mode. There's no doubt about that, you know what I mean? When you look at the difference in power, I did the math and added it up. But when it comes to GPU, RAM, and all that, it doesn't. And it's not only that, but when it comes to handheld power draw, nobody tells people about these stats. Digital Foundry is smart because power draw means how fast are you using the power of the battery too, you know, all that type of stuff. You don't want it to overheat, none of that, right? You got to make sure your watts are set right. We know about watts, you know what I mean, from just building a PC. But, you know, with these devices, it's obviously a much smaller scale, but the way that Nintendo's able, like you said, to produce that image that they're producing to you, and to only have that type of power draw, meaning you're going to get more handheld playtime. That's much more important. That's why when you saw that test, Cyberpunk only lasts like an hour on Steam Deck. On Switch, it was like 2 hours and like what, 7 minutes or whatever. It's a huge difference.
That's in close proximity, that gigantic power efficiency advantage enjoyed by Switch 2.
And it's flexible, so you're like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna now get back on the TV, you know what I mean? Or I could put, when I'm done with that, get back on that mode, turn my controllers into this, like do the mouse style. It's just that creativity from the ground up. It's so much more of a better device just in general. The 1080p screen, everything about it, you know what I mean? It has its own games, everything. Now, Steam Deck's still a nice device. You know what I mean? I'm not no hater. And obviously, like I tell people, the only reason this exists is because part one of this exists. That's where it's born out of. So they're not each other's enemies. We're just doing comparisons.
By using the internal power metering offered by Steam Deck, I found that dropping TDP down to 5 watts versus the standard 15 watts gives us a much closer like-for-like test up against Switch 2 in terms of power draw. The effect on performance is devastating on Steam Deck, however, dropping frame rates in this test down to 9.2 frames per second against Switch 2 with its 23 to 30 FPS window.
See, it's not easy like you think. You would have thought it would have been okay, but look at that. It's not possible because the technology in there needs that much watts to work. It's crazy how Nintendo has that type of technology that they have, but they're running it like this. This is insane.
The effect is so devastating on the deck that it's actually running in slow motion. With a similar power draw, Switch 2 simply streets ahead. Going back to Kabuki, average frame rate on deck rises to 13 frames per second, but of course Switch 2 is running this content mostly locked at 30 frames per second with a big resolution advantage. Thing is, it's okay for Steam Deck OLED to use a lot more power because its battery is much larger, 50 watt hours versus Switch 2's 19.75 watt hours. And as demonstrated earlier, we're sapping a lot of performance.
Yeah, they're using the OLED, by the way, which is more expensive than the Switch. Keep in mind, too, like I was telling people, they didn't want to listen to me. I said, look, guys, what you're not understanding is that dock costs like 120 or whatever. If you remove that from the actual console price, this handheld's like $330. It's not that expensive. That's the dock with the 4K and all that, with its own fan and everything now, that they're charging that much for. But if you think about this versus that for the deal, this is a no-brainer. You see what I mean? If it was just sold by itself. Telling you, but people don't like look at those type of things. That's the thing that blows my mind. I'm like, it's right in front of you. This doesn't come with a dock. You would be paying that extra 100 and something taxed on. The regular Steam Deck is $399. So what, you want to pay $520 for it with the dock? See?
From the deck by using an upscaler we don't need because Steam Deck doesn't have a 1080p screen. For the purposes of our capture, I then re-ran these benchmarks at native 720p, a much better fit for the deck's screen. 800p external capture is a little bit trickier. And as the larger battery accommodates the much higher power draw pretty much, I ran at full TDP, 15 watts. Going back to the Kabuki run, performance is generally smoother than Switch 2 now, though there are still some blips beneath target frame rate. Same situation in the Beast in Me City Centre side mission test. Still some fluctuations under 30 frames per second, but the
Like I said, keep in mind, this is the OLED version. Wait till the Switch OLED comes out.
deck is a touch more stable overall.
Yeah.
Both runs are the same or better than they were when we were using the arguably unnecessary upscaler, and it's a better fit for the deck's use case. It's not a 1080p machine, plain and simple, but the fact is that in these test sequences at least, native 720p is actually fine in performance terms. In this test content at least. So what have we learned from this experience? Empirically, not a great deal. A PC game running on a Linux handheld through the Proton translation layer without custom retooling for mobile gaming and without an iteration of the best upscaler on the market means that Switch 2 goes into this one with a range of unassailable advantages. In docked mode, though, the gulf in performance and rendering resolutions is such that it's difficult to come to any conclusion other than that Switch 2's GPU is far more performant, even though the processor is on a supposedly suboptimal fabrication technology.
Yeah.
In theory, Steam Deck should have a CPU advantage, but it's hard to tell that this is the case when you're so heavily GPU limited. In handheld play, though, there's a strong case that in real-world head-to-head comparisons based on actual use cases, Steam Deck holds its own. Native 720p is a better fit for the panel. There's no need to use DRS or upscaling to achieve similar
Well, if you have an OLED, yeah, of course. I mean, that's a $500-something handheld.
performance to the Switch 2 operating in a 450p to 810p dynamic resolution window. In areas where we kind of think we may be CPU limited, the Steam Deck also performs more smoothly in adhering to the 30 FPS target we opted for. And yes, of course, Steam Deck OLED's HDR is actual HDR, not something we can say about the Switch 2's effort. A lot of subjective analysis there, but a hard fact you can take away from this is the efficiency of the Switch 2 being in a world of its own, way ahead of Steam Deck, which in itself is highly efficient compared to a great many Windows handhelds.
Yeah, and like I said, it just looks much better too. Look how blurry it is. Look how clear that is down the line. When you have all that together, yeah, it's a no-brainer. But that's why they had to grab the OLED for handheld mode, because the other one was going to get smoked, I'm telling you. So yeah, the only thing is that Nintendo needs to fix is their damn HDR. You can fix that with a software update. Same thing by adding in VRR undocked for 4K 120. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this. The truth is out. You see it now. Power draw, everything. Yeah, that stuff matters if people didn't know about that. All right, y'all. Peace out. And we have our answers here. Later.